Everybody loves buttons. When I was a kid, we put them all over our jean jackets. And today I see them on backpacks and on people's lockers, on their hats, and I see grandmas wearing smiling faces of their grandchildren in their school uniforms when they go to the ball games. And that is what we are about. We are making buttons. So our goal was to design, promote, and sell buttons related to our school somehow. And the purpose was to sell 50 buttons so that we could make some money to help cover some of our PBL projects. So our goal was to sell 50 buttons, which would have been a total of $225. So I feel like the best way to show you everything we accomplished is to just kind of go deadline by deadline and explain what we did to meet each deadline and what worked and what didn't. So our first deadline, we tried to get our bowling buttons done. So the first thing that had to be done was pictures needed to be taken. So Mrs. Toole took care of that and got our pictures taken. And then we had to design buttons. So here's a sample of a button we designed of Melanie. And we created that in Photoshop with a lot of help from Mrs. Toole because we were pretty new at this. And then once we got one button made, we turned it into a promotion. So we made these flyers, which were hung around the school, a few of them, and then they were also posted on Facebook. And then we sold buttons. And we sold, I think I show it later, but I think it was about 14 buttons for bowling. And I feel like we could have sold more with that, but we were a little late getting our promotion out. It was already January 19th. The bowling had started on January 1st. So I would like to have seen that get done a little sooner, and maybe we could have sold a few more. This is a sample of our Facebook ad down here, and then this is what the button and what the flyer looked like that we made all that in Photoshop. Then our second deadline was we had to be a little more creative and come up with some ideas because there wasn't a sport happening during that time. Track hadn't started yet, basketball was still going, but we were already done with basketball button sales and bowling was over. So we came up with this idea to do birthday buttons for the elementary. So the idea was parents could order a button for their elementary child, and we would run over and take their picture and then make a button real quick for them and deliver it to them on their birthday, and that would help make the day special. So we went and we got Raleigh's younger sister and Whit's younger sister to pose for us for a picture. We got permission to do that, and then we made the sample button, and then we made the sample flyer. So Lincoln and Blake made this flyer using Canva, and then they took the flyer over to Mrs. Hoover to see if we could get permission to do these buttons. And unfortunately, Mrs. Hoover said no because she really liked the idea, but she thought there would be some kids who didn't get a button and then it would leave some people out, which was a valid reason. So we had to ixnay this whole button process and move on to something else. So our next concept was to do custom buttons. So Blake and Lincoln spent a few days trying to come up with some different ideas. And I helped them come up with this one. This is my Stanley Cup. We were trying to think of trendy things that were happening right now or just fun things that they could make buttons out of. So they came up with these two ideas for buttons as a sample in order to do some promotion. So they made those two buttons on Canva and then created them, then took photos of them, and then made this flyer on Canva, and we promoted that on Facebook. And we didn't get a lot of orders. We got 2 orders. This is one of them. One was called Kelly's Chaperone, and then the other one said the other lady's name, I think, was Amanda's Chaperone. And so we did get a couple button sales on that, and it did fill in our gap that we had between buttons. And then our last deadline was to start promoting track buttons. Our third deadline was to promote track buttons. So we didn't quite have track pictures yet, but we wanted to go ahead and promote them because track practice had started. So Blake and Lincoln made this flyer on Canva to promote the junior high track buttons without an actual button on it. And we didn't really, I think we might have got 1 order off of that. And then for the 4th deadline, we actually did the real junior high and high school track buttons. So we took pictures. I took care of that. Melanie, my yearbook person, helped me do that. Blake and Lincoln organized that, talked to Misty Baker and got that taken care of because we had to make sure they had their uniforms. And then we designed those buttons in Photoshop with help from Mrs. Toole, printed one, made one, took a picture of it, and then made the flyer in Photoshop, put it on Facebook. Here's an example of where it is on Facebook. And then we started to sell those. And we did sell quite a few track buttons, but not as many as we liked. But I'm happy with how those turned out. So our mentor for this was mainly Mrs. Toole, which is myself. Kind of weird to talk about myself, but I'm going to do that anyway. I'm the graphic design teacher at Washington County High School, so that is my credentials. I know how to use Photoshop really well. I know how to do the button making, and I know about promotion. So I help them do a lot of that. And this is a sample of just one of the things I did was just take the photos, get them all organized, and put together on the file so they could use those. So this is a sample of some of the track pictures. As far as our team roles, Lincoln checked the emails, which is what this is here, a screenshot of the emails and him answering that, and then filled out the forms, which we had here that were put on the board, and then Blake would make most of the buttons, and then I would do the Photoshop work sometimes Lincoln would, sometimes Blake would, it kind of depends. When it came to, if it was actual Photoshop, I did most of the work because Lincoln and Blake struggled a little bit with using Photoshop and had to use Canva, but that's one of our problems and solutions we'll talk about here in a minute. So here's just a picture of the button machines that Blake would use to make the buttons. So let me talk a little bit about our team roles. I felt like working together, we could have done better because everybody tried to do their own role and didn't want to do anybody else's. And so if someone was gone and Lincoln was the one who made that button, then Blake didn't know where it was and didn't know where to find it and whatever. So it cost us a lot of time. So I felt like our communication could have been better with each other to get things done more smoothly. So some of our problems, we were a little slow filling orders. We told people we should have orders done in 5 working days, and a lot of times we did not make that. Solution was just, I kept pushing them harder and harder to get that done, and we did a little better, but I still don't think we did a lot with that. There were a lot of missed days of school between Blake and Lincoln that made it hard to get everything done. No solution for that other than just telling them they needed to get here. And then a lot of times we didn't remember how to use the software, so we'd get to Photoshop and not remember where we'd saved things or where stuff had been put. So the solution for that was just to remind and say, here's where they are, and just keep going over and over. And by the end, we were doing better with that. So reflection, things learned. That approval process with the buttons for the birthday buttons, I feel like what was learned from that was we should have done the approval first before we did the sample and all that stuff, because we would have saved ourselves a lot of work. So to just remember to do approvals first. Another thing I thought would have really helped our team is if everyone had learned to do everything, and by the end we were doing that, but I think that would have helped us get a lot done better, and then Lincoln and Blake would have been able to help each other a little more too. And then I also think when you're only using Photoshop every few weeks and you forget stuff, it would have been really smart to have written down, like to have Lincoln write down, oh, here's the 3 steps I do to do a button. I think that would have helped a lot. Our final results, we sold 24 buttons, which was almost half of what our goal was. So we made $108. And overall, I think it was a good project, and I hope that Lincoln and Blake learned a lot from it, and I'm definitely going to continue to do buttons in the future. Thank you. Are there any questions?